Hello, and welcome to this video. I'm going to be talking about some of the models that have been talked a lot about in the press in the last few days about the course of the coronavirus in the United States, the COVID-19 disease, and predictions about when it might peak and what the death totals might be. They're all based on models of one kind or another, and there's an expression that's talked about a lot in statistics and in modeling. All models are wrong. Some models are useful. All the modeling I've been showing you are abstractions of what's really going on. The question is, are they useful? So we're going to be evaluating some of these models and asking, do we believe their assumptions or their structure or the way they're capturing what we think is going on? And coming back to the question, is this model useful? In particular, I'm going to be talking about the dichotomy between what Tony Fauci is saying with warning that we might have 200,000 deaths in the United States or more, and this model that was released by the University of Washington a few days ago that suggested that it would peak very soon and that the total mortality in the United States by the end of the summer, when all is said and done, will be less than 90,000. So very, very different worldviews, and so I want to look at what those are like. I will warn you that I've been spending hours on this model from the University of Washington trying to find out more about it and try to evaluate it. I'm not there yet, so we won't get the answer today, but I want to pose the question because it's really important. People are acting on that model as if it's truth, and we don't know if it's truth. Well, we know it's not truth. The question is it useful or is it a dangerous sort of self-deception? I don't think there's anything nefarious going on. I just think that the model, I don't think is as strong as some people think it is. So where are we at right now? Looking at the number of cases in the world, I'm grabbing two different images. They both came from the last 24 hours. We've seen about 75,000 cases, 80,000 cases reported in the last day, and something like 5,000 deaths. And those rates are increasing and will continue to increase for some time. In the United States, I think they'll increase for quite a bit of time, 4 or 6 weeks, something like that, not 2 weeks. But I'm not at all certain of that. For the globe, it will certainly increase. There are places like Africa and South America and parts of Southeast Asia where this is going to ravage the population because they simply don't have the economic and medical infrastructure to deal with this. So what's the status of the United States right now? The New York Times is doing, I think, a brilliant job of maintaining this database and making it publicly available. It's becoming more and more important, in my opinion, to look county by county, not just state by state. As of today, which is April 1st, well, probably right into April 2nd now, 4,800 people have now died in the United States. The statistic you keep hearing today is that's more than the people that died during the 9/11 attacks, terrorist attacks. That's a really interesting comparison because it makes it feel some sort of some gravitas, some weight. It makes an impact. There's an expression that's attributed to Stalin, but we believe it now. It probably predates him, which is that one death is a tragedy, a million deaths is a statistic. The problem with all these numbers is that we become sort of desensitized to what they mean and how many personal tragedies there are. Referring to 9/11 helps make it feel personal again. I think that's a worthwhile thing to do. And in the United States, 200,000 people have been infected, so we are now world leaders in the number of infected cases that we know of. So this is new, actually, on the New York Times webpage today. At least I haven't seen it before. It's a graph of where cases are rising the fastest. I've talked a lot about doubling times, and doubling times being 2 and 3 days being incredibly fast. And what I love about this graphic is it shows up here. This is the scale. I blew it up. Red is doubling every 3 days or faster. Orange is every 3 to 5 days. Yellow is every 5 to 7 days, and this sort of tannish color is longer than 7. And if we don't have any cases to report, we can't tell how fast it's growing. Doubling every 3 days, just so you understand that, is just ridiculous. 100 cases today, double in 3 days. 200 cases, double again. 400 cases in 6 days, right? We're going to get 800, 1,600. We're going to get tens of thousands of cases in just 3 weeks or something. It's just an incredible rate of increase. When I talked about which states are in trouble video a few days ago, I called out specific areas, and I'm really excited to see this graphic because it helps bring home what I was talking about. I talked about the Northeastern corridor from Boston to DC becoming one giant hotspot. And it wasn't just going to be New York anymore. It was going to be Philly. It was going to be Boston. And that's clearly what's developing here as we're seeing this huge cluster of spread happening in that very densely populated area. I talked about what's going on in and around Detroit, Michigan, Chicago, Indianapolis. I made a shout out to some of my family members in Cleveland and said it starts getting difficult. St. Louis, I referred to New Orleans. I didn't know where in Texas it was growing fastest. I knew it was that the number of cases were highest in Houston and Dallas. I didn't know where it was growing fastest. It turns out it's Houston. I had talked about South Florida as an area growing fast, Denver. Phoenix, I knew was growing fast. I guess we're now probably seeing that in Tucson down here. What you don't see, though, is fast growth in some of the first areas we had heavy infections up in Northwest and in Washington State and parts of California. We are seeing some faster growth in Southern California, but the initial high number of cases was further north. So that means that there are places where the infection rate is not increasing as quickly. So we've seen a number of things. We've finally seen Anthony Fauci again after what seems like a sort of a weird week of disappearance. We've talked a lot in the news and on this channel and elsewhere about cruises as a sort of the ultimate floating prison for someone who's trying to avoid coronavirus, and we've seen some terrible tragedies. So it's become very apparent that giant big boats, floating cities, are a terrible place when a disease gets a hold. It can spread like wildfire. And, people on cruises are tipsy and having fun. And so it's just because of who they are that spreads. Well, no, this is happening on a U.S. aircraft carrier as well. It's just a fundamental fact if you're in a confined space with a lot of people that a disease like coronavirus, SARS-2, COVID-19 virus will spread. So it has nothing to do with the cruise lines or the people per se. It's the nature of large groups of people close together. There's been a lot of changes in what's coming from Washington about this, from we're going to be open by Easter, isn't that beautiful, to it's going to be grim and so forth. I do think it's going to be grim. The president warns we're in for a very painful 2 weeks. I agree with that. I think we're in for a painful 2 weeks and then some. That's where the modeling is really important, because the University of Washington models suggest we're going to peak in 2 weeks. And the models that Dr. Fauci is referring to seem to suggest that we're going to have much greater burden of mortality and hospitalizations. They also talk about ICU beds and ventilator needs, and the University of Washington model suggests that in some states we're not going to need all the hospital beds they have, and that's a very different picture than has been painted elsewhere. So there's been some pushback against Tony Fauci's model. I don't know him. I'm talking to him like he's my friend, with this 200,000 deaths thing. And he sort of really doubled down and said, no, this is really an issue. We need to be really, really careful. And I agree with him. We will get lucky if we hit 100,000 and don't go much over. I think that's almost impossible. 200,000, I think, will be a favorable outcome compared to what some of the alternatives will be if we're not careful. And I think we're not being careful. We're in lockdown in San Diego. We've been that way for, I don't know, a week or something. But I took my daughter to a doctor's appointment today, and I was astonished at how many people were driving on the roads and people walking on the streets in small groups and just mingling, which is, of course, going to create chains of transmission, which means that even though we've been in lockdown for a week, we are not getting a handle on this pandemic spread, or this epidemic spread, in California. All right, so this is the article that refers to the University of Washington study. And one of the things that's really important about science is the concept of peer review. Scientists have difference of opinion. Some scientists, we think, can produce very sloppy work, maybe not intentionally, maybe intentionally, I don't know. But the point is that a good study gets sent off to other experts in the field for comments. Even when the comments are positive, they often improve the quality of the presentation of the information and so forth. It's a really sort of fundamental, bedrock, keystone part of good science. And there's a reason I'm telling you all this, trust me. So as soon as this model was announced, folks in the White House, President Trump jumped on it as the new model of choice because it predicts many fewer deaths. It was predicting 2 days ago, 84,000 deaths as the sort of total for the United States based on a number of their modeling parameter estimates, and I'll show you some of that. And so they started referring to this in the briefing as the Chris Murray model, and I'm like, Chris Murray, excellent. In science, we don't usually so much focus on the Chris Murray model as opposed to the what is the math, what is the science, what is the nature of the model. And so the model, this information was updated as of March 31st when I grabbed it yesterday, so fresh off the presses. Nationally, the model from the University of Washington predicts 2,200 deaths per day at peak in mid-April, very soon, and a total of 84,000 dead by the end of summer, with a confidence interval from 36,000 to 152,000. So first of all, you can see that the estimate's not particularly precise. Anthony Fauci's 100,000 certainly fits within that range, so they've acknowledged some fair amount of uncertainty. Now, their model is based on every state in the country doing at least 3 of these 4 things: closing schools, ending non-essential services, sheltering in place, and imposing strict travel restrictions, at least 3 of those 4. And they're modeling this based on the improvement in the rate of spread that was seen, or the curtailing, I should say, of the rate of spread in China when they clamped down on this. There was an interesting comment about this by another scientist in the field. This is someone named Dr. Bray Flight, who I don't know, but is a professor at School of Medicine at NYU. And he pointed out when he was interviewed for this article that the study's projections are lower than many others because it assumes a strict, enforced nationwide shutdown. And at least from what I've heard about the shutdown in China, it was extremely rigid and painful and enforced. And what I saw today driving around to the doctors and back, we're nowhere near that. But this professor of medicine said if these measures are not taken and they have to be drastic and they have to be immediate, the real estimate may be 2 to 5 times higher. So 2 times 80 is 160, 5 times 80 is 400,000 deaths. So it's really important that we know whether we are actually behaving in a way, well, that the model and our behavior are matching.